Incoming transmission.
The Klingonese word of the day is Ilich.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
So, this is a huge victory for the good guys.
Scotty, beam me up.
Resistance is futile. Live long and prosper.
Boldly go where no man has gone before.
Greetings and welcome to the Computer Resume podcast, the show covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. I'm your host, writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Small in stature, big in heart, smells like brownies, and always there when the scheduled guest cancels at the last minute. It's Ren Sims! Yay!
It's me! Yay! Yeah, I'm only necessary when someone falls out.
Now,
Well, I can't get on the schedule otherwise.
Oh, that's not true. You're one of our favorites. Come on. I think I haven't run the numbers. A better podcast host would have. I think you're our most frequent guest over the last. Actually, this is the last episode before our 3-year anniversary.
Yay!
Yeah.
Look
Yeah.
at that.
More on
Nice.
that later. But yeah, thank you so much for carving out the time on such short notice. And for folks who are listening, who did listen to the last episode, unfortunately, Brian Denham, editor-in-chief over at Antarctic Press, had some deadlines come up. Some projects got backed up last minute, had to bail, which is fine. He's a good friend of the show, and there's absolutely no hard feelings. So hopefully he will be back on sometime in the not too distant future. But when that message came through, I was sitting at the D&D table and to my immediate left was Araya, fairy wizard, played by Ren Sims.
Who smells like brownie?
Yeah, who smells like brownies. And you heard me I'm going to have to edit myself, but you heard me give an audible oh shit. You're like, what's wrong? I was just like, oh, somebody bailed. I have to reschedule. And you had this look on your face. You had this look on your face. Your eyes got really wide. And I was like, would you like to do it? And you very graciously said you would. So thank you.
You're welcome. I get to help.
Yeah. That night was really interesting. And now that I've got you one-on-one, I can actually pick your brain about how I did with my first homebrew of. We had a couple puzzle rooms and to varying degrees of difficulty, it seems like. General thoughts about our last D&D session. There was 2 rooms that were kind of based around religious teachings, I'll say. And then 1 room that was based on a pop culture reference that was
None of us got.
Yeah, none of you guys got. Although your husband kind of stumbled across the answer after seeing like the Goodwill Huntingness of his brain kind of work for a second.
Oh yeah, he was gonna figure that puzzle out.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts about those rooms and how you guys fared in that night?
Honestly, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the puzzles. I am so upset that I didn't catch the Sinatra reference. My bad. But that is actually not one of his songs that I know. So
it's I generally, if I'm doing like chores around the house, there's a couple of channels that I'll ask my Google Dot to play, and big band era, i.e. Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra tends to be one of them.
Oh yeah.
Along with 70s rock and like 90s pop.
That's weird.
Yeah, to be honest, like I dig the 70s rock channel quite often.
Oh, I love 70s music.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I'm a disco queen.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you get a lot of good AC/DC, you get some good Queen, like there's a lot of really great stuff coming out of the 70s. And every now and then they'll play a song and I'm like, think that's from the 70s. And I have to like double check stuff. But anyways, we are here at the beginning of Strange New Worlds. Had you watched any of Strange New Worlds before you said you'd come on the show?
No, I had not. So I was really happy when you said I was doing the second episode because they wouldn't have to binge watch everything in like 2 days.
Right. So just before we get into like some of the nitty-gritty details of this particular episode, what are your overall thoughts about the first two episodes of Strange New Worlds? Like, how are the aesthetics? What do you think of the performances? The special effects are, through the roof, obviously, but like, what are your general vibes that you're getting from Strange New Worlds?
Honestly, I'm really enjoying it. I find it funny that it essentially starts out with a sex scene.
Kind of.
Every time I have an episode, there is some kind of booty in the episode. And I know I'm not covering the first one, but still.
It's not on purpose, I swear to God.
It's fine. I just find it hilarious every single time. But I like the aesthetic. I really like the music. The theme song is good. But I don't know if it's because I was watching it on my phone in my car, but I was very underwhelmed by the Enterprise shot that you always get when you see the ship. It's like, oh, okay.
In the theme or like throughout the episode?
Well, like in the space dock. You know how you get the very first look at the ship kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. There's been a tradition of those big sweeping shots that seem to take forever, revealing the Enterprise. In fact, it's even been poked fun at in Lower Decks, giving ridiculous angles of the Cerritos and all that stuff.
Nice.
But I feel like they kind of took a cue from the repeated use of the big sweeping shots of just kind of like, well, they saw it in Discovery season 2, and fans definitely know what the 1701 looks like at this point. So we're going to give you okay, here's the Enterprise. Let's keep moving with the story.
Okay. See, that makes better sense, and I'm not mad at it.
Yeah, I think the motion picture gets a bad rap for those big long shots of the Enterprise, which they significantly cut down in Wrath of Khan. But those are feature length movies. They're like, hey, look, we've got 55 minutes. We gotta make this thing move. Okay, here's your big shot of the Enterprise. Everybody screenshot it for later. Let's move on. What else strikes you just generally about the first couple episodes here?
It has an interesting tone to it. There's a lot of joking. There's a comfortability with the crew. Even the new people are you can see them fit.
Yeah.
And the tone of it, you have that, and then you also have like the second episode, like 4 people could have died. Like, it's surprising they didn't, kind of thing. It's like it's funny how they pair the two, and I think it fits pretty good so far. So I'm interested to see how they do the other episodes and if they keep with that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find with serialized narratives is when a character, even if you're in a high stress situation, the sort of joking camaraderie between characters kind of helps solidify you as a reader. It invests you in that, with that character. But also when a character unexpectedly dies, it kind of raises the stakes of like, oh, nobody's safe. And even with something like, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but when Sam Kirk gets knocked out by the Comet's musical energy burst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He basically got an electric shock that might have killed him. It was like lightning.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, they even say it like his heart stopped. Like that's a problem. But again, it kind of, and I mean, we know like, oh, Kirk, Sam Kirk lives for a while. He's probably okay, but at the same time, it's just kind of like, oh, the force field's down. We don't have a medical officer with us. What are we gonna do? And not to give too much away, but The stakes stay pretty high throughout this series, at least through the first
Okay.
2 seasons that we've seen so far. So you've got that to look
Okay.
forward to.
Nice.
But yeah, let's focus in a little bit more here before we get to the recap on this second episode, Children of the Comet.
Yes.
We see that kind of, we're past introductions to a degree. I mean, we get a few more introductions. We get more information about these characters and who they are, sort of, setting the stage for these narratives as they're going to unfold. But I was just wondering if you had any sort of overarching thoughts, like I said, before we get to the recap about, meeting Hemmer and, meeting Sam Kirk, watching Nurse Chapel interact with Spock. We get a couple of good shots, a couple of great moments between Pike and Number One. We get a great little walk and talk between Uhura and Ortegas on their way to the
Yes.
captain's table. So any interactions stick out in your mind? Any fun moments?
Honestly, the whole episode was fun. Like it's everything that you essentially want a Star Trek episode to be. It has some action in it. There's some social, not issues, but usually a social conundrum of some kind. It is fun. It is super fun.
Well, I think we have a bunch of really fun things to talk about a little bit further. But before we get too much further into our discussion, let's get to this week's recap. Brought to you in part by our Patreon supporters, Rev J, Jerry Antimano, Cosmic Crit, Kitty B, David Willett, Ed Milner, Fleet Admiral First Class Fred Sims, and Ren, and Space Monkey 73.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Uhura is invited to a meal with the other crew members in Pike's quarters, where she reveals her uncertainty about her future in Starfleet because she only joined to escape from the pain of her parents' death. Later, the crew attempt to alter the course of a comet that's set to kill all the inhabitants of a desolate planet, but it has a force field that prevents this.
And on that note, we cue the music.
Uhura joins the away team and transports to the comet's surface and discovers it responds to music.
Ooh, that's interesting.
A starship of shepherds who are escorting the comet position themselves between it and Enterprise. They believe it's a being called Mahanit, who is an ancient arbiter of life. Enterprise distracts them, allowing Spock to alter the comet's course.
Whoa, that was close.
As it passes by the planet, it releases water vapor into the atmosphere, significantly improving the conditions for life.
And there was much rejoicing.
Uhura decodes the music from the comet, which indicates that it had expected this interference, and Pike ponders the origins of the comet and whether this was more than just a coincidence. He also considers the lives of the cadets he'll save in
The future!
Hi, this is Connor Trenier from Star Trek Enterprise. You are listening to the Computer Resume podcast.
So we see some interesting things kind of unfold here in this episode right off the bat with it's being told from the perspective of Uhura. In fact, you could even go as far as to say that this is an Uhura episode. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think of the interaction with Uhura and Ortegas? There's a little bit of gentle, friendly hazing right off the bat. In fact, it's kind of hard to call it hazing. It's more of a traditional practical joke of telling the cadet to dress up for the event.
Like you do.
Yeah. What do you think of this first interaction between these two characters?
I want to say that they're going to be friends. You can definitely tell, but it's one of those things where Uhura just seems like she's just starting. Like this is essentially her first day.
Yeah, pretty early on for sure.
So I'm really curious to see what happens with their friendship, because if they have one, they seem to have a good rapport with each other.
Yeah, looking at the hazing joke of, you know, having Uhura show up in her dress uniform when everyone is clearly dressed down and prepared to relax
Yes.
at the captain's table. I'm reminded during my time at the jail, one of the things that we would do for new officers is to tell them to go get the handcuff repair kit. There is no such thing as a handcuff repair kit. But it would, you know, there was like a secondary reason, you know, we would send them to get this and we would not tell them where it is. So it would actually send that officer throughout the facility. And because the facility was so expansive, they kind of got to learn their way around a little bit. It was a bit of a crash course in what's the easiest way to get through all these places. So while it was a joke, there was a secondary reason to familiarize new officers with the facility. You've worked in a lot of offices. Has there ever been any sort of practical jokes like that played where you've worked?
No, I've worked for pretty professional places that they don't do that.
So what you're saying is you're better than all of us.
No, not at all. I'm sure
I'm
there was
just kidding.
I've always been the quiet one in the office, so I usually got left alone.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, I think because, and I know your husband Fred, who has appeared at least once on this show.
You got him one time.
One time. He could probably speak to his experience working in law enforcement as well, in that sometimes it gets dull, sometimes it gets boring. Like it's you do stuff to kind of pass the time. In fact, Ortegas even says, like, it's a big ship. You get bored. So I can understand that. There's an interesting moment there at the captain's table where Pike asks Uhura where she sees herself in 10 years, and he kind of catches himself because he realizes where he'll be in 10 years. Did this moment stick out for you at all?
Honestly, what stuck out more is the fact that later on in the episode, is it the first officer? Is that what they're called?
Number one?
Yes.
Una? Yeah.
The fact that she called him out on it later.
Yeah.
That's what stuck out for me, is she caught it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty
very
cool.
Perceptive, that number one.
Yes. It's good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because I think some of the Trek episodes, there was a tendency to overlook obvious things, whereas we, the audience, sitting there, and maybe we're, you know, objective third parties, but, you know, looking at it's like, how did you not catch that? But even something like him taking a second try at that phrase of where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Yeah.
Number one, picking that up shows she's not just eye candy on the ship, and she's there, you know, she's there because she is a very competent officer. That's one of the things that stuck out to me, like even watching, you know, Ortegas maneuver around some of the debris from the Comet, of like, oh, these are very competent officers. Like, if you were new to Star Trek, I think this episode would kind of give you a clue that these people are incredibly smart, very, very capable.
Yes, very much so. Something else I just realized, there are so many women on the bridge, and it makes me so happy.
Yeah. Especially when you look at how Strange New Worlds came to be, in that, you know, it's sort of using the original pilot episode, The Cage, as a jumping off point, where Pike in that original episode makes the comment of, I can't get used to a woman being on the bridge, to now we've got a lot of ladies on the bridge. And I think it's interesting to see, and I mentioned this during our coverage of Discovery, that Star Trek right now is the most diverse it's ever been, in front of and behind the camera, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, because you're getting new stories and you're getting fresh takes from multiple different perspectives. Do you have any thoughts to this?
I think it's awesome, and I think this may actually be one of those series I will watch. I hate to say that, but some of them, it's like I watched them once and I'm good, but I haven't seen this one yet, and I'm really kind of like in the direction it's going.
Well, if you're if the pilot light is lit for you with these first two episodes, I highly recommend sticking with it because it just gets better and better.
Okay.
I've talked with a few folks who have been watching it pretty regularly, and there's a lot of folks who haven't. So,
Mhm.
you know, there's no wrong time to watch Star Trek.
Oh, no.
It's always the right time to watch Star Trek. But you know, the other folks that I've talked to who have watched Strange New Worlds have all been really happy with it. Save for maybe a select few who can't wrap their brain around New Trek for some reason. Um, so yeah, so hang in there because this is just the beginning. It's going to get really good really quick.
Fun.
Let's move into the episode a little bit further. They encounter this comet, which isn't a comet, or it is, but it isn't. Mahamit. Yeah.
It's like, is it a sentient being? Like, that's the thing, is like I'm very curious about this. I want to know more about this.
So, just a word about the comet before we move on into because I definitely want to talk about the shepherds a little bit. But with New Trek, they started doing this thing on Paramount Plus where it's the Star Trek brand sort of opening title card where you see the ship and it takes off and it forms the shape of the delta, and then there's the words Star Trek. So you know,
Yeah.
in case you're curious, yes, you are watching a Star Trek show.
Just in case you forgot.
Yeah, in case you forgot. But each one of those opening brand logos is specific to the show. And there's
cool.
there's little elements in it, usually pretty subtle, in there for that are specific to the show. For example, with Strange New Worlds, you can actually see the comet because it's in that. I want to say it's maybe in the second shot. You'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the comet. Because because it's bringing life, but it also can somehow see the future. So that's
it is future.
Yeah, it's one of those weird elements where, as a fan, I mean, this episode is pretty early on in the run. It's the second episode, and we are now 20 episodes deep on Strange New Worlds, but this comet has stayed in that opening franchise logo, and I'm really curious if it'll come back around again.
I hope so, because that's kind of it's very interesting.
It is. But yeah, so we find out that the comet isn't a comet, and that the comet is being guarded or accompanied by this species. They refer to themselves as shepherds, and they hold sort of religious reverence to it. It's sort of an artifact that sort of brings life and has all these elements about it. Kind of reminded me of like the Ark of the Covenant in the Indiana Jones movies, of like, or like the Holy Grail in Last Crusade, where there's this group of religious people who are there to guard the Grail and keep it safe, and they end up like whipping out guns and trying to kill Indy, and he's like, I'm trying to find my dad, like, leave me alone. Growing up here in the South, you know, having some sort of religious background is almost inevitable. But one of the things that was prevalent in my growing up in the church was this idea of predestination, which is kind of this whole comet's big thing, is that it foresees
preordained.
Yeah, there's an element of predestination. And in terms of modern religion, the idea of predestination is, if we are destined to go to heaven, do you actually have to become a Christian if you're already predestined to go to heaven? So that's where the big confusion is amongst religious believers. Any thoughts to this idea of, you know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Kind of.
I've never thought about it that deep before. Like, where did religion come from? That's essentially what you're asking me.
Yeah, and I was really trying to think of a simpler way to ask it, and I was like, oh, maybe there isn't a
I
simple way
mean,
to ask this.
there's no simple way to answer it either.
Yeah, yeah,
It's one of those things where it's like some people have to believe in something.
yeah,
Like they cannot function unless they're doing it for a reason, or not necessarily a reason, but there's an end game.
yeah. And when we had Kevin C. Neese on the show back in the day, at this point, but he wrote the book, The Gospel According to Star Trek, and one of the big things he focused on in the book was this big belief that a lot of Trek fans have that Gene Roddenberry was an atheist. And he goes on to examine interviews he gave and articles he wrote, all these different things, in basically coming to the conclusion that Gene Roddenberry wasn't an atheist. He was against charlatans, people using religion to get to their own means and to satisfy their own agendas. And
Yeah.
I wonder if we had spent more time with the shepherds, because again, we see them in this episode, and not to spoil anything, we're 20 episodes in, we haven't seen them again. So I'm hoping they come back around, because I'm fascinated by their structure and how this all came to be and what is their end game. They seem pretty bent on protecting Mahanit, the comet, but there's got to be more to them than that. Any ideas or any
Not
thoughts about any of this?
necessarily.
No? Okay.
They may
That's
not be that
okay.
complex. It could just be one of those things, like he said when he had kind of introduced himself. It's along the lines of, this is how it's always been. This is what we have been bred to do for centuries, and they don't need another reason. This is just how they do it, and I think a lot of religion is like that.
Yeah, I
You
can
just you
definitely
just get
attest to
born
that.
into it.
Yeah. There's two things that the shepherd said that kind of stuck with me. Is that the first one that comes to mind was, we don't even remember how this came to be, which goes to what you were just saying.
Yeah.
But the flip side to that coin, which makes me think that at least they're on the right track, is they ask Pike, can you keep an open mind? And that seems to be, in terms of religious belief and religious practices, it seems to be less militant if you approach it with an open mind. And I think that's something that gets
Yes.
lost here in the Bible Belt, is like, well, if you don't believe this, you're against us, and da 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 da. I was like, okay, hold on. Like,
Yeah,
if
you're either with us or against us, and nothing in
yeah,
between.
yeah, exactly. Anyways, I don't want to harp too much more on that, but I do find the shepherds and their relationship to Mahanit and that whole structure, that whole organization, very interesting, because there definitely does seem to be two sides to the whole thing, where they're willing to kill like anybody who messes with it, but at the same time,
Oh yeah, they take their job very seriously.
yeah, but at the same, and also asking, can you keep an open mind? And when the ship is in front of the comet, they don't destroy it. So anyways,
Yeah.
there's a lot to unpack there, more than I'm probably qualified to do. But anyways, anything else about this episode sticking out to you? Any of the other character interactions? We get a fun one with Nurse Chapel and Spock.
Yes.
And a couple of others. We see Sam Kirk and Uhura interacting there on the comet. Anything else jump out at you about this episode before we get into the stats section?
I don't remember her name, because I'm terrible with names. But the character that is a security officer, she is fascinating.
Yeah, Lon Noonien Singh,
Yes.
ancestor of Khan Noonien Singh, from Wrath of
Okay.
Khan,
Yes.
played wonderfully by Christina Chong, who's a great actress. She's been on Doctor Who. She actually
fun.
she actually had an album come out last year, Twin Flames. So she's very talented and does a really fantastic job. If Lon is a character of interest to you, buckle up. Her stuff gets pretty deep pretty quick.
Nice.
I think
Roller coaster,
she's
let's do this.
yeah, to be honest, like I was about to say, oh, she's a fan favorite, and I was like, honestly, everybody on this show is a fan favorite.
Right? Like, everyone is very likable. Like they're just there's a vibe there. Like it's just very chill.
Yeah, and you can tell she's super dedicated to her job,
Oh yes.
and it's not lost on her what her last name is. So there's a lot of personal baggage that she's got, and
Yeah.
yeah, there's some interesting things coming down the road for Lon, and I can't wait for you to see it, and so we can talk about it.
Oh,
But
nice.
in terms of this, we kind of see her very bluntly addressing young Uhura of like, hey, you gonna save the day or get us killed? Like, and to be honest,
You have choices.
yeah, it was like, but as a former officer myself, it was just kind of like I kind of appreciate that blunt directness of like, hey, here's the task, and here's our compatriot who's circling the drain. If we can speed this up a bit, that'd be great. Any
Here's
thought?
the problem, fix it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about any of the characters or interactions or anything else before we move on?
No, I'm really enjoying. I mean, everyone, the acting's amazing. Like it's a good show.
Yeah. I think we are at the beginning of a really interesting journey through these couple seasons of Strange New Worlds, and we've already spent quite a bit of time dissecting some of the character interactions, which of course lends to the writing. Certain things that we're seeing, a couple of probably directing notes, and of course performances. These are all wonderful, wonderful actors in a franchise that we already love. But as we do on every episode, even though we sing its praises, we always ask the question, who do we blame? This episode was written by Henry Alonzo Myers and Sarah Tarkoff. Let's start with Henry. His first credit was on 4 episodes of The Chronicle. And then he worked on 49 episodes of Charmed. He did 10 episodes of Ugly Betty, 4 episodes of Chuck, 12 episodes of The Magicians, 3 episodes of Future Man before this, his first writing in the franchise, but not his last. And then Sarah Tarkoff, early on in her career, she did 9 episodes of Video Game High School from 2012. Are you familiar with Video Game High School? I've seen the name, but I've never watched any of it.
No, but I need to find it immediately.
I thought if anybody's seen this, I know you and Fred are much more inclined to gaming than I am, but yeah. Sarah would
awesome.
Sarah would also go on to write 6 episodes of Vixen, followed by Vixen the movie. That was in 2017. Sarah has also worked on 51 episodes out of 170 total of Arrow from 2016 to 2019. But this is her first writing on the franchise, along with Henry Alonzo Myers, but it is not her last. So we'll see her work again. And then this episode was directed by Maha Vervillo. We've seen her work before. The last time we saw her work was on Discovery Season 2, Episode 11, Perpetual Infinity, which we discussed with Star Trek cosplay comedian Danny Rydell back on episode 114. And then in terms of guest stars, we've got Dan Genote, aka Lieutenant Junior Grade George Samuel Kirk Jr., Sam Kirk. He was born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So we know he's a nice guy because he's Canadian. But his first credit was providing voiceover for the English version of Samurai Warrior 2, that video game for PS2.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'll have to look into that. His first film was Death Race in 2008, starring Jason Statham. It was one of the ones where he takes his shirt off and beats people to death with it, I think. Then he did episode 3 of the first season of Being Human. That was in 2011. And then he went back and did some more video game work in the Assassin's Creed franchise. He did some stuff for Assassin's Creed 3, Black Flag, Unity, and Dead Kings. Those were in 2012, 13, 14, and 15, respectively. Then he did 8 episodes of Rain, 25 episodes of Good Witch, 28 episodes of Bold Type, and then 5 TV movies and another Assassin's Creed game before this, his first appearance. Technically not his first appearance. His first appearance was last episode. We got a glimpse of him at the end. We discussed that with Patrick Cunningham the last episode. But here we are. We're going to see more with Sam Kirk later in the series. Ren, as we do each episode, we ask the question, is this essential viewing? If somebody is sitting down and working their way through Star Trek for the very first time, and they come to this episode, Children of the Comet, is this one that they must see, or can they skip this one?
It really depends. Like if you're watching the series, yes, it's important. But as Star Trek as a whole, I don't know if it would be essential.
You know, that's a fair point.
It's good though.
Yeah, it is really good. I always, I'm big on completing the things, says the guy who still hasn't finished watching Deep Space Nine.
It's totally understandable.
Yeah. Looking at Strange New Worlds as a whole, they made a big thing about, and I mentioned this last episode, that they were returning to an episodic format, but that the character arcs were what was going to be serialized. And I think in terms of this episode specifically, we're still coming out of that pilot episode, and when dealing with this entity that can foresee the future, if you're invested in Pike's story that started for us with, well, technically with the Cage, and then into Discovery Season 2, and now here in Strange New Worlds, I think this is a good one for people to keep watching. But again, with everything else that happens in the episode, I don't know that it's really vital to everything else. I think they get into more heavy stuff, stuff that ties to the rest of the franchise kind of later down the road. So if you're following Pike's story, yes. If it's inconsequential, then yeah, you might be able to skip it. So, Ren, thank you so much for carving out the time to come on and talk about this episode with me today. Do you have any parting thoughts before we start to wrap things up? Anything about the episodes, anything about the franchise as a whole, anything about another wonderful appearance here on the Computer Resume podcast? Any parting thoughts before we go?
I'm really looking forward to watching this. And it's been a long time since I was interested in a show like this. So I'm excited. And thank you for having me.
Oh, it is our pleasure. It's our pleasure as always.
Yes.
It's never a dull moment when you're on the show, let me tell you.
Good to know. I am a chaos pixie.
Well, folks, in 2 weeks on February 19th, we will be joined by our executive producer and the dilithium in my nacelles, Kat Davis, will be here to discuss Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria, which is available exclusively on Paramount+. Ren, where can people find you on the internet?
I am RC Sims 82 on Instagram and Facebook. That's about it.
And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials. From all of us at the Computer Resume podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you in 10 Forward.
Us on Patreon and like, rate, review, and share on all your favorite platforms. Feel free to send us your subspace transmissions to computerresumepodcast@gmail.com or at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The Computer Resume podcast was created and produced by Mr. Todd A. Davis. Our logo was designed by Will Martin and Justin Bishop. The opening theme was produced by Justin Bishop, and our outro music was provided with permission by DroneNode. Additional music was provided by Mr. Todd A. Davis and Gary Horn, and the voice of Computer Resume podcast and executive producer, me, Kat Davis. Hashtag LLAP. We'll see you next time.
Going through a Star Trek. We're doing Star Trek stuff in space. We probably got some phasers and shuttle pods, and we're gonna find a brand new race.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?